Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening on this rainy Monday. This is English stream. Obviously, tonight's topic is international trade. Okay. Well, international trade and globalization are tonight's topics. The plan is as follows. I will briefly talk you through some definitions of what international trade is. There are more than one definition. There is more than one definition out there, of course. A good old Google search will give you all the information you need. I will talk about some important bodies in international trade, mainly the World Trade Organization, because that's the biggest one. All the others are sort of, well, sub-organizations. They will, or a more detailed description or more detailed information on what the bodies are, features in the exams, so wait until the end. We will then go through some pros and cons of globalization, which, well, basically globalization would be the umbrella term and international trade would be one of the basically effects of globalization, but I will also tell you what globalization is, and I will show you two exams. They mainly focus on international trade. Also include globalization to some extent because they kind of go together. Anyway, so there are definitions of what international trade is. I think the easiest one, and I think the word international trade is quite self-explanatory anyway. Trade is handel. So you basically trade goods. The word also works as a verb. You trade goods on an international basis. So it's the exchange of goods and services. Services are Dienstleistungen across borders and on an international level. So that means that Austrian companies, for example, can sell their products basically anywhere in the world. There are countries that are still sort of strict with their border controls and that have more restrictive markets. America, for example. So you would not be allowed to trade your goods or your services on an unlimited level, but many countries in the world have free trade agreements or follow the principle of free trade, and free trade, as the name suggests, means that everything can be traded. It doesn't necessarily only have to be goods, it also works for services, as I said. One of the services would also be people's workforce, so people can go and work basically everywhere in the world, with limitations, of course. Some countries would probably only take you and the services that you have to offer if it is something that the country needs. If that is a skill where they don't, or a skill in which they don't have that many specialized workers. But as I said, you can also go and offer your services. Within the European Union, international trade is possible basically without any limitations. You don't really have border controls anymore. You don't really have to pay custom fees, so Zollgebühren, or at least not to an extent that you had to pay them prior to the European Union. A thing that is now quite frequently discussed is the Brexit and what England will do in terms of international trade as soon as they leave the European Union, or should they ever. They're kind of trying to negotiate good contracts, good terms with the rest of Europe. International trade or trade is a big thing in England, also across the across borders. So that is something that the UK still hasn't figured out. So will they still allow international trade to such an extent as they did until now? Will they themselves trade as many goods and services as they did? Also has to do with labor and so on and so forth. So international trade is an issue at the moment. Second definition is maybe a less straightforward one. International trade is the opportunity to be exposed to goods and services not available in your own country, or which would be more expensive domestically. Domestic means within a country, so what's the German word for domestic? Anyway, you know what I mean? Within Austria, in our case. So we get goods and services that we don't have because, I don't know, the vegetables or the fruits don't grow in Austria. So we have to ship them or fly them to Austria. So we get them from somewhere else because we don't have them. Or people come and work in Austria because we don't have the service or the type of work that they can do. Or, which would be more expensive, which is one of the downsides of international trade, I guess, or what many people consider a downside. This is the case if a country has the goods that they want, exotic fruits, for example. They can nowadays be grown in, well, you can grow them in glass houses and so on and so forth. There's actually a word for that. Glass house was the wrong word. Greenhouse, that's the word. You can grow them, you can grow them in greenhouses, so you don't necessarily have to ship them. Or climate's getting warmer, that also has an effect on that. So, but sometimes growing them within Austria is more expensive than shipping them into Austria from another country. Basically a point of criticism because local domestic products shouldn't be more expensive than foreign products, so products that have to be imported into Austria. So basically one of the points of criticism. Can't really think of an example for services, but of course that holds true as well. Holds true in many very specialized areas. There's a lot of big companies who would basically import people from other countries because they have a better education in this and that field. Universities, among others. So yeah, you can also trade people, basically, in this case. There is pros and cons, of course. The pros here in green, so the pros of international trade. First point is a quite straightforward one, quite logical. I think you have a broader target group. So if you, as a farmer, for example, know that you can sell your product basically anywhere in the world, wherever there is demand, wherever there is Nachfrage, then you have a broader target group, which gives you more customers, which gives you a broader range of customers, which gives you more money at the end of the day. You have a higher turnover, you can sell more products, more of your service, whatever. So you have an advantage on the market compared to countries that are not allowed to trade on an international level. There are some countries like that with very strict political rules. So not all the countries follow the free trade principle. There are also countries that follow a principle that basically only imports and exports goods that are necessary for the country and to an amount that is exactly calculated. Makes it harder for smaller farmers to, for example, sell their stuff to go on the market. But in international trades, the more customers you have, the better. So that's an advantage. Point 2 relates to us customers. We have a broader choice and we have a broader opportunity of workplaces, for example. So choice mainly in terms of products. If you ask your grandparents, for example, there was probably not that much choice in terms of whatever, food stuff, dairy products, whatever there was. Nowadays we get stuff from everywhere. We get Italian dairy products, we get, I don't know, cheese from Ireland, beer from, I don't know, the States, whatever. We can import and export everything, so that gives us a broader choice of products on the supermarket shelves. The point of opportunities refers to work. You can go pretty much anywhere in the world as long as you're highly qualified. The visa process has become easier in most countries within the European Union. You don't even really need a visa anymore. So international trade has facilitated also the exchange of work or finding work in your case. The last point might be a bit overgeneralized, but usually countries who have very good trade relationships, usually they also get along quite well, they support each other. Political situation between the two countries is usually quite stable, as both countries are interested in maintaining a good relationship. International trade brings a lot of money. So usually they try to, well, be good friends, sort of thing. So mainly in political terms, of course, because you wouldn't want to harm the country that gives you money, that gives you workforce, whatever. There are also downsides, of course, as always. One of the downsides I mentioned already. So one of the big points of criticism in international trade is the fact that there is some price dumping going on. We can import fruits and vegetables for a very, very cheap price, and local farmers find it harder to sell their product because they would be more expensive, especially if it was green and ecological farming and so on and so forth. Milk would be an example here. Local farmers in Austria, Germany, Switzerland, whatever, find it hard to get the reasonable price because there's a lot of competition from neighboring countries. They sell their milk way cheaper than Austria does or Germany does. So farmers, as I said, find it hard to sell their stuff at a reasonable price. Also goes hand in hand, international trade is quite bad for the environment. If we have to ship fruits from Italy, then that causes a lot of CO2 emissions. Or if they come by trucks, lorries, same thing, CO2 emissions as well. Ships cause CO2 emissions as well. So yeah, it would be way more environmentally friendly if stuff was produced and sold in Austria, but it isn't because usually foreign countries are cheaper. And they also kind of try to beat each other in terms of being cheap, so there's a lot of like dumping wages in agriculture and close production going on. But that's a different topic. So it causes local unemployment as well. If the farmers don't have anything to sell, they would probably close their businesses, if you want to call it that. So it increases local unemployment and there's a loss of local producers. There was a statistics in the newspapers recently of how many farmers gave up production in the past 2 or 3 years. It was quite a high rate because, well, yeah, it's obviously not worth it anymore as there's a lot of competition on the market. So you can look that up if you need an example for the disadvantages of international trade. I did a great job in formatting my things. It's not even the same font size. Makes it quite hard. The bodies in international trade, the most important one is the World Trade Organization. They are the ones who regulate the trade in goods, services and intellectual property, which I think is very interesting. Between the participating countries, not every country in the world is automatically a country that belongs to the World Trade Organization. There's a long list on the internet. Many countries are, but as I said, not all of them. The World Trade Organization gives a framework of rules on how trade should be done. They try to basically prohibit discrimination. So they try to make sure that the whole trade thing in or within all the participating countries is sort of fair. Critics of the World Trade Organization say that's not true, but that's a different story. So the World Trade Organization guarantees just dealings among the members, just is gerecht in this case. So they have to treat each other respectfully, and they are not allowed to breach the respective other countries' laws and so on and so forth. It's also the World Trade Organization's job to reduce tariffs, so that would be the money that, like taxes and stuff, that you have to pay if you want to export stuff, or also the tariffs that you have to pay if you want to import stuff. As I said, within the European Union, the tariffs have gone down considerably. I don't know much about mass shipping or mass importing and exporting, but in any case, taxes have gone down, so have all the other trade tariffs. Yeah. As I said, there are critics of the World Trade Organization who basically say that the World Trade Organization doesn't really make sure that it's fair. They would always support the richer countries, because the more money the richer countries have, the more money goes into the system, basically. I guess there is a difference in like terms of output, financial output, if you, I don't know, compare the United States and Africa, for example. United States definitely have more money to like invest into the system or to feed into the system. So, well, critics say the World Trade Organization isn't as fair as they claim to be, but well, there's also something like the Food and Agriculture Organization. They're the ones who set certain standards in terms of hygienic standards that food has to have, and so on and so forth, based in America for some reason. The World Trade Organization is based in Switzerland. There's the World Customs Organization as well, customs, so the toll organization. So they treat the topics of import customs and export customs, also a topic in America at the moment, as the president wants to increase all the customs. And the World Health Organization is part of the whole thing as well. They try to make sure that all the participating countries get medical treatment, sufficient medical treatment, and they're also responsible for all the like conditions of labor and so on and so forth. They also make sure that labor is done in a healthy way, more or less successfully, I'd say. There are more bodies in the exams, but I didn't want to list all of them. Globalization, last point. I tried to come up with some pros and cons. Let's start with the pros. We have a lot more choice because of globalization nowadays. Everything has become more international. Because of the internet, we also know what goods and services and stuff other countries have. We can order them online. So nothing is easier than ordering stuff from America, whatever. Might be quite expensive, but nevertheless, it's very easy. We have almost unlimited access to information and culture, almost, because there's still some countries who are quite cut off from the rest of the world, who which don't have regular internet access and so on and so forth. But as a general rule, we can learn everything about other countries and cultures, and that's because of globalization and because of the internet, because it's the most important tool. Globalization encourages free trade. As I already said, free trade is every country can trade everything and to every other country. You just need to find a customer, basically. Globalization gives you opportunities for development. That means that because of globalization and because of the increased demand for certain products, also smaller countries in Africa, for example, they can develop because they are given the machines for farming, they are given the know-how for doing farming in a way that pays off at the end. So that is development. Other countries, or some countries, are given the means to then be able to copy other more successful or more advanced countries, basically. Culture, we can learn everything about other cultures as much as we want. We see other cultures, because of traveling, we can experience other cultures. The cons, there's a lot of outsourcing going on. That means that mainly labor is outsourced. Big companies go to cheaper countries where they don't have to pay that much to their workers, and where the regulations in terms of safety and the regulations in terms of working conditions and environmental standards are lower. So if if an Austrian company outsources to, I don't know, where do we outsource to? Poland, for example, the wages are not that high. They don't have that many regulations in terms of free days, health insurance for workers, and so on and so forth. And probably, I don't really know, but also the standards in terms of environment are probably lower, so companies don't get checked that much if they really obey the limits of CO2 emissions and so on and so forth. You probably all know the saying sort of thing, the rich are getting richer. That's one of the points of criticism for international trade. International trade only helps rich countries because rich countries can produce more and more goods. That means that they find more and more customers. That in turn means that they get more money. The poor countries don't have such a big target group. They don't have such a big audience. So they don't really develop that quickly. So it only plays into the hands of the big industrialized nations, like most countries in Europe, America, Russia to some extent. It's bad for the environment. That's definitely a fact. Because of all the shipping and transporting stuff back and forth. That's definitely an issue. It's very bad for the environment. It would be more environmentally friendly if we bought within our own countries, basically, and tried to keep imports, in this case, to a limit. And culture, some people also see it as a negative point because we know so much about other cultures and introduce so many elements from other cultures, mainly America in this case, that our own culture sort of gets lost and a bit watered, basically. Whether or not you agree with this point is up to you, something to think about. There's this term out there that means says Americanization. That means that all countries in the world are trying to copy the Americans, basically. Finding cool what they find cool, and so on and so forth. Whether or not that's true, that's up to you. I'll quickly show you some exams so that you know what to expect, or what maybe awaits you in the exam. You have a situation, you're working for an internationally, that's a hard word. You work for an import-export company based in London, let's say. You always want new interns, the English word for Praktikanten, sorry. And you're kind of touring different countries because you are looking for such interns. And now you're holding a talk in school. You have to tell people what international trade is, so a definition of the concept, who the operating bodies are, so the World Health Organization, World Trade, the World Bank also plays a role. World Bank officially should make sure that countries get an even share of the riches that the world has, but, well, different story. Brief historic outline, that's in your book. Globalization is not a new thing. People have always traveled and traded goods across history. The Silk Road, for example, or the infamous slave trade from Africa into Europe, into Africa, South America, and so on and so forth. And some facts and figures on international trade. There is a text attached as well that gives you, or this is statistics basically, that tell you which country exports and imports how much of what, basically. Discuss the pros and cons of international trade. You have a text, quite good one actually. Gives you a lot of information, and then you have to follow up discussion. They're going to ask you some questions, and you should ask them some questions too. Usually, or very often, the questions go in the direction of consumer ethics and shopping and so on and so forth. So Are you careful about what you buy? Do you try and buy food that is produced in Austria, and so on and so forth? So that would questions. I should stop talking. I can't. Questions like that definitely lend themselves for the topic because, well, you haven't studied international business yet, so the questions probably go more in this be a good person, be an ethical shopper direction, than really into the hard facts of international trade, because I don't think that you have to know that. Exam number 2. Oh, that's exam number 1. Oh, that's actually 2 times the same exam, which is my fault. I'm awfully sorry for that. So that was only 1 exam this time. I'm awfully sorry. I can basically tell you what the second one was about. No idea where my second exam is. The second exam was more about the pros and cons of globalization. Also discussing things like outsourcing, like cheap clothes factories, ethical shopping in general. So one of the bullet points was, for example, to briefly talk about the Clean Clothes campaign. There was also a link to the Clean Clothes campaign. Many big brands, big chains like H&M and so on and so forth, they now claim that they produce their clothes under fair working conditions. It was also about the role of the customer in the whole thing. Can we as customers change the whole thing? Can we kind of soften all the downsides of globalization and international trade a little by being good consumers, or does it not matter because economy is always more important than individual people? Along the lines of this argumentation, also a definition of what outsourcing is. What areas are affected by outsourcing? So it's mainly production, or it's very often production of mobile phones, parts of mobile phone, car parts, and so on and so forth. But nowadays it's also outsourcing of services. So some companies outsource their accounting, for example, their Buchhaltung, because there are people sitting somewhere in other countries who do the work for lower wages. So, well, yeah, I think that was it. As I said, I'm awfully sorry for the fact that there is no second exam, but I think you get the gist. Are there any questions?
No.
No. Good. If any questions occur, let us know. And if not, I wish you a very nice rest of your Monday evening. Thank you very much and goodbye.